Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of January 31st, 2021. Today, we're going to have a discussion about transhumanism in the post-Soviet world and possibilities of international collaboration among transhumanists from many different countries. And first, I will introduce our panel, myself, Gennady Stolyarov II. I'm the chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party, or if you're a Russian speaker, Геннадий Столяров II. Я председатель Американской трансгуманистической партии. And we have our secretary, Pavel Ilin. We have our director of applied innovation, David Shoemaker. We have our director of visual art, Art Ramon Garcia. And our special guest today hails from Minsk, the capital of Belarus. His name is Alexander Griboyedov, and he is the founder of the Society of Rational Longevity, in Russian that is the Общество, рационального, долголетия, that is based in Minsk, Belarus. So welcome. We are pleased to have you as our guest today. And for our first question, please tell us about the Society of Rational Longevity, its history, the motivation behind founding it, and some of the activities it has engaged in thus far.
Thank you very much for invitation. I'm glad to become the part of your show. I'm happy to have conversation. I don't speak English fluently, so maybe sometimes I will be a little bit slow. I'm sorry for that. I will need to formulate some thoughts in mind in Russian and then to give them in English. Maybe I will not have an ability to pronounce such beautiful monologues as other guests of the show, but I hope that I will be able to formulate some ideas and to give some facts that I think are important. What about the history of creation of our organization in Minsk? First of all, for example, in 2015, we haven't got a transhumanist movement, and we haven't got people who call themselves transhumanists in Belarus. My interest to that ideas started from practical moments, from practical issues. I have parents of high age. For example, my father is 72 years old now. So I was interested in medical improvements, in the news about how new achievements in medicine can make someone's life longer. I was reading that news. I was making an analysis, and I found the news about totally artificial hearts with which people had an ability to live rather long. It was a real sensation, more than 3 years with totally artificial heart. I was impressed, and I started to search for more information about cyborgization, about artificial lungs, artificial kidneys, about biotechnology, and so on. At that moment, Russian transhumanist movement already existed, and I have found their website, mm, some classic documents from transhumanism tradition were translated to Russian at that moment. For example, the document I like very much, Nick Bostrom's fuck you about transhumanism. Mm, I like that agenda very much. I agreed with mm, ideas that were in that documents, and I thought if I agree with mm, maybe even every point of that agenda, that means uh, I can really call myself a transhumanist. Then I started to search for uh, people of the same mm, ideas in Minsk, in Belarus. First of all, I haven't found anybody. I was having a conversation on life extension topics of on topics of the technical progress acceleration with my friends, and at the first stage of creation of that organization, my friends helped me to make meetings, lectures. I prepared material, and I use some documents from classic transhumanism. I analyzed information about biotechnologies, and I have created first lecture. Mm, and one of my friends mm, was working in sales. He was given an advertisement for that lecture, and that's how the project started. It was something like info business, but in Belarus we call business only firms that have a big income, but I don't know how in the United States. But and if the firm doesn't have a big income, we call it a firm or just an entrepreneur. So I was a private entrepreneur in that transhumanistic info business, and mm, people who were interested in the ideas found the information about the lectures in the internet, and we already have met, and that's how the bigger team was created. Also, I was in contact with Russian transhumanists, and I was not the only person who have written to them, and they have given me contacts of other people from Minsk. That's how the team we work together now was created. Mm, uh, we were discussing about the first project that we can start. One of them was that information project, and I have plans of developing it at the moment, and I'm working uh, to develop it. And also, we all were very interested in cryonics, and maybe, as you know, if you need to cryopreserve your relative, and we have a cryofilm in Russia and in the United States. If we need to preserve a person in Minsk, we need to do it in two stages. So we should vitrificate him from his vascular system and then move to the storage where it will be put into the nitrogen. So the problem of vitrification occurred, and we need to learn the technology if someone of our relatives or someone of us will die. In that case, we needed that technology, and we found one person in Minsk who was uh, exploring cryonics, who was gathering the information about the cryopreservation protocols together. I had conversation with him. We became partners in that project. We still doesn't have any cryo firm or cryo activity, and we haven't cryo preserved anybody still, but we need to get ready to mm, because even if we will contact with existing cryo firm, we need to fulfill that first stage by ourselves. And then we started the conversation with Russian cryo firm, Cryos, um, about improving our knowledge about that first stage of cryopreservation, and we even have a common conference in Minsk. The one of the directors was having a public speech at our lecture. Mm, and the result of that activity was that now we know how to preserve with glycerin protocol, but we know that some other protocols exist. And for example, as we think Alcor is using more advanced protocol, now we are in a process of improving our protocol, and we also have to find some agreements with uh, our local governmental organizations that bury people, and all the organizations that bury people in Minsk are governmental. Uh, we are interested in mm, agreements with their personnel, with surgeons or some other medical staff to take part in that procedure because they know the anatomy of people, and they can, of course, make it much better than volunteers. So cryonics is one of our directions of work in transhumanism. Our community is interested in improving it. Um, and now the other direction of our work is Parabursis Experiments. We made an agreement with one laboratory, and we want to settle an experiment when we connect two goats. One goat is old and the other is young. They have a common bloodstream, and we want to explore the biomarkers of animals when they will be connected. It's our common project with Russian transhumanism movement. Mm, we are discussing the scientific details together, and um, and our panel of experts is common. So uh, we mm, we have three projects. One of them is a media project. It's creating articles, materials, YouTube materials, uh, lectures, uh, and also cryonics and that experiments. We also want to communicate with uh, local um, investment institutions, some investment group, and we are starting to create a database where we put projects which are connected with longevity topics, and also we are little bit interested last times in automation of processes, clever houses created of more modern infrastructures. We can't concentrate on that project because, first of all, we are longevity activists, but the idea is about if you if your house is really good automated, you have much more free time, and it's a new years of life that you can mm, that you can give to science and art, for example. Uh, so uh, that's the end of my answer to that question.
Yes, thank you for that overview. And indeed, there are many fascinating subjects that we could discuss just based on that. But I want to emphasize you did hold a conference about 1 year ago in Minsk. Essentially, just before the start of the pandemic, you were still able to gather a large number of people in person, including the US Transhumanist Party foreign ambassador from Latvia, Alexei Kadet, who spoke about the denial of death and how it features in a lot of cultural responses to human mortality, and the reluctance of a lot of people to consider transhumanist ideas because they either think, well, they're going to be immortal anyway, or they try to get the thought out of their minds, essentially, by focusing on other things. So that was a very interesting presentation, and I've linked to it in the YouTube chat for our audience. Now, it is in Russian, so if you understand Russian, it'll be easier for you to follow along with that presentation, but watch it anyway, because you will get to see his introductory slide where he identifies himself as the US Transhumanist Party foreign ambassador from Latvia. So that was really fascinating, but I wanted to also ask you, how were you able to get all those people together in Minsk, and what did you have to do to set up that conference?
Hmm, Thank you for the question. I like the lecture of Alexei Cadet very much too. It is an interesting lecture, and we will try to find resources to give English subtitles for our lectures. What about the conference? It was not difficult to organize it. It is my favorite part of work to organize conferences, and I have experience in that from the very beginning. That conference was rather large. We have about 100 visitors. We have given an advertisement about that conference in a place where programists often held their events. So it was an interior messages to the people that often visit that club. So we gathered a good audience, and we thought it would be a good idea to begin the activity of our organization that was first governmentally registered at that moment as a public organization, to start the activity from the conference, to give more people the ability to know more about our ideas.
Yes, thank you. And there are other videos from that conference available also on your YouTube channel. So again, I would encourage our viewers to take a look. And this is, of course, part of the transhumanist community now in the post-Soviet world. But I am interested in how you would characterize the state of development of transhumanism in the former USSR, in Russia, in Belarus, in Ukraine, in Latvia, in any other country that has a transhumanist presence. What is the state of transhumanism currently? How far advanced is it in that part of the world, in your opinion?
Hmm. Uh, I will try to answer that question, but maybe the representatives of each country will give more details about their countries, but I have some contacts, and I'm I'm ready uh, uh, to tell something about the situation. Uh, Before I was speaking about our community in Belarus, so maybe now I will start from the situation in Russia, where we have a lot of colleagues. It has a rich history, and they started much earlier than we. They have an organization, Russian Transhumanist Movement, that organization have created a crowdform, and I think it is better known in international sphere because of creation of that firm. But they also have other projects. For example, it is also media projects. Uh, they were often visiting TV shows, TV programs, TV debates with transhumanistic agenda, uh, and their famous transhumanist, one of the pioneers, the leader of that movement, Danilo Medvedev, was visiting some uh, church TV channel. Yes, they have a church TV channels in Russia, and he had debate with the priests about transhumanism. Uh, Also, they have practical projects. For example, they have a nanotechnological project, a program in virtual reality uh, with attached physics laws that they were working together with scientists to attach to that program, and you can somehow construct molecules from molecules in that program in order to to make possible the creation of nano assembler, and uh, they also they are also supporting nanotechnology scientist Alexander Olekevich, who works on creation of nano assembler. They are also very interested in strand intellectual strengthening using different cognitive techniques, increasing rationality. It's a little bit similar to the agenda that your guest Uguchuku was telling about in program. Uh, they also have a soft, it's called Narracord. It's constructed in order to work with large amounts of information, and uh, th- they build all their work in that program. It's have something similar with mind maps, but the interface is different, and it has a fractal structure. Uh, it's a tables and a tables inside. Mm, so I have listed the projects of that community, and there are also other communities in Russian transhumanistic landscape. For example, another leader and I think well-known person in international transhumanism. He is often visiting international conferences. Is Mikhail Batin, and his project Open Longevity. It and also Dmitry Vermenko and his blog nestarenie.ru. It's in Russian and it's translated like not aging point rule. They are mostly concentrated on biohacking. They are professional PubMed analytics, and they are making reports about how to optimize uh, your lifestyle. What is the better approaches to sleeping, healthy food, physical activity, and they have very sophisticated details about how to do it right. And all the Russian and Belarusian community, we are following that instructions and that medical analytic Dmitry Vermenko is a quite popular figure in our Russian-speaking community. Also, we have Longevity Alliance. It's a Longevity Alliance in uh, social network. In Contact is a very popular Russian social media. Many Russian-speaking people spend time not in Facebook but in that network. And first of all, the idea was to unite all the groups on topics of transhumanism, longevity, futurism in one coordination group to work together. And then the activity of that coordination group uh, invited some other people interested in development of that organization. It's now a media project in that network, and it's developing not very quickly, but I think they will have practical projects soon too. What about Ukraine? I also know uh, Igor, who is a U.S. Transhumanist Party diplomat. He was making some lectures in Ukraine. Uh, I was a little bit sad to know that now he is in some biotechnological project and he is maybe not going at the nearest time to make public activities. I know many transhumanists and longevity activists from Ukraine, but it's a pity they are not still united into one organization. They are starting the stage of creating common chats, but the organization haven't still occurred. I know one very interesting blogger. The name of the channel is встретимся в будущем in Russian. In English, it's we will meet in future. He's concentrated totally on cryonics, and he makes a great effort of translation English cryonics texts and making the agendas of protocols easy to read. And also, I can name rather famous Russian blogger, Must Reader, who was at our conference, and uh, he was leading the debate on topic how to make transhumanism more popular. It's a big blogger. He has a channel of about 100,000 subscribers. Now he also created an English speaking channel, and he is invited um, longevity activists from different countries for the interviews. I also have a list of different bloggers, and maybe we can give a link, or you can find a specific video about them at my channel. Uh, I stopped at the topic of Ukraine. Yes, it's a pity the community still doesn't exist. I also know that there is some longevity organization in Kazakhstan, but I've never had contacts with them. It's a pity, but I'm making work to create the connection. I know one person from that country, and maybe I will ask him to visit that organization. So, as I said at the beginning of my answer, I mm, I don't have detailed information about some countries, uh, s- but I know that it is rather developed transhumanist community in Russia, and uh, now we are working in Belarus, maybe even to overcome that results. We have a community too, and it's registered.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that answer. I think that is a thorough overview for the purposes of our audience who would be interested in getting an understanding of how far along the transhumanist movements in various countries are. And you mentioned some individuals with whom I have some familiarity. So Greg Mustreader interviewed Charlie Cam, the US Transhumanist Party 2020 presidential candidate, and people can find that interview on YouTube in English. So he is indeed branching out to an English speaking audience. I met Mikhail Batin in Las Vegas in 2019, where he was in attendance at the RadFest conference, the last of the in-person RadFest conferences prior to the pandemic. And he and I, as well as several of his associates, had a long conversation afterward about various ways of promoting transhumanism and what we think are effective strategies and ineffective strategies. He also had a film that he created in 2020 about longevity advocacy that is in Russian and has gathered quite a large number of views for such films, in the tens of thousands of views. So yes, we are definitely aware of a lot of the work of transhumanist activists in the post-Soviet world, but it's always good to have more information and a kind of characterization of where the movement is at. So thank you for providing that. Now, along these lines, we understand that the recent political environment in Belarus has been challenging. So what is your vision for building a transhumanist organization in that kind of political environment, perhaps less than stable political environment?
Thank you. It's a very interesting question. Uh, I think that our organization is not a political party, and it's not a political force. So uh, we are not involved in that conference for governance the country for political power, and we can continue our activity as we started it. And the plan is the same. We don't need to make some specific changes in our plan. I think that the higher uh, achievement to our organization uh, can be to become a one issue political party sometime. So we we are not going to be involved um, in that political concurrence, but we can influence the interest of people to their technologies of life improvement, of making the lifespan longer, of improving the medical technologies, of creating a special laws about cryonics, for example, is also very important to have a law about that technology, about that social practice, and that's our aims. Also, we can become a several issue political party, but we are not in concurrence for their political power. So, as I think, it's my own opinion, the situation doesn't tremendously changes for us in that situation, and even in the situation of pandemic, in a situation of political crisis, we will continue to do things that we think important, and we think that the most important agenda is agenda of making life longer, because death is the problem number one that unites all people.
So you believe that no matter how that political situation in Belarus as a whole turns out, you would be able to continue the activities of your society?
Hmm. Uh, I think that there are some scenarios that can stop our activities, the most dangerous scenarios. But if the situation will stabilize, and it is stabilized a little bit at the moment, we can continue our activity, because uh, many people are interested in the same goals that we are interested, and I see that people support our intentions to make the work that we have already started. So if something really awful won't happen, we can continue, I think.
Mhm. Yes, thank you for that response. And I think the next question is quite related to that. When you speak to people in Belarus about transhumanism and life extension, what are some of the common reactions that you get?
Oh, yes, I have some funny stories about that. Mm, Mostly, people support the topic of life extension. Uh, all the Practically all the people I know said to me that they want to live as long as it will be possible. Uh, but we have some funny situation about the term transhumanism. I know that in Europe and maybe in America too, people are more concentrated on humanism part of that word, and they start arguing about does it means new humanism, or it differs much from humanism, and they consider themselves as humanists. That's why they don't want to 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 say that they are transhumanists. But in Belarus, people are mostly concentrated on trans part of that word, and I had many situations when people thought that it is something about transsexuals or transgenders, and it's a funny moment that many people in Belarus don't understand what uh, um, uh, the information about transgenders and transsexuals, and uh, because in at post-Soviet TV, it was a lot of jokes about jokes with men in women clothes dancing on stage, some clowns. It was some part of post-Soviet, some part of perestroika humor, and uh, I know that the name for such person is maybe a travesty. It's called a travesty in English, but people in Belarus call them all transgenders or transsexuals, and they think that it's somehow connected with that funny clowns, men with bright cosmetics on their faces and with huge artificial breasts, and they think that something funny will follow. I'm not upset about that because I'm glad that they don't have a really negative attitude to the term, and mm, in that context of that clowns, the term is really something new, and I'm sure that mm, that previous associations with the term will be forgotten. And what about longevity and some arguments about that? We, like in other regions, have uh, some rather typical arguments people say about overpopulation, for example, and they can also say about the bottom of a long life. But most people support the ideas of living longer, and it's a rare situations when someone is starting argue, and I think that. mm, between people with whom I had conversation, it's more that arguments uh, are more often associated with uh, the desire to have some intellectual conversation on that topics, and on desire um, to find more information, but they are not really hostile to that ideas. And what is more vicious, people in Belarus are not rich. They have rather low salaries. For example, $500 is an average salary, and maybe their conditions of living are not very high. For example, one Canadian hockey player once said that Russians and the Belarusians are the same in that aspect, that we are living in flats that are smaller than his kitchen, and it may be really true. So some people can be quite pessimistic about their ability to get the technologies, because not every person has an ability to uh, visit a doctor every time he wants to visit, to make a biohacking panels analysis, because not each person is even from a middle class is rich enough to do it, and I think it may be the main reason, the main aspect of pessimistic attitudes to our idea in Belarus. And if the wellness, the salaries will grow, people will become more optimistic about that. Uh, that's the situation, that's the attitude to our ideas and the name of our community in the region.
Yes, and thank you for those responses. It's interesting, though, I've said this before for English-speaking audiences, the term trans is just Latin meaning to go beyond or to go through. I'm kind of surprised that in the Russian-speaking world, there's this association because there have been terms historically in Russian history that used that prefix. For instance, the Trans-Siberian Railroad that was constructed in the 19th century. So do you think people just don't reach that far into their history to try to understand the meaning of that prefix as being possibly something more general, so it could refer to going beyond anything depending on what
Hmm.
other term that word is used with?
I think many of that people who were joking about trans prefix were rather well educated, and they for real they knew the meaning. But as I said before, my opinion is that it's a big part of humor in the region, and people just want to create that situation to talk about that trans people that they think look like at that TV shows that maybe enjoyed when they were children. Uh, so uh, that's why they are starting that topic. Yes, that's my opinion.
It's interesting because in the YouTube chat, Jason Geringer says that the trans prefix is mistaken like that in the same way in the English-speaking world, but perhaps, as you mentioned, there's more of a joking nature to those kinds of comments in the Russian-speaking world. That is, the Russian speakers perhaps know the difference to a greater extent because, as you said, they are more educated and they have more terms like that in their history. What's interesting, though, is in the English-speaking world, I think that level of confusion has been declining over the years because the transgender movement has become more prominent, and so people know it as its own phenomenon. And those people, they use terms like transgender or transsexual to refer to themselves, but trans anything else is now seen as different and distinct. So transhumanism doesn't have the same kind of probability of being mistaken for transgenderism as it might have had 15 years ago. So I would say that that's good news. It means that as transgenderism becomes more accepted in mainstream society, transhumanism has the opportunity to show people that it really isn't the same as transgenderism. So yes, thank you for that conversation. Now, another observation that I've had, and this is reinforced by your remarks, is that there is less hostility to transhumanism in the Russian-speaking world, but the kind of skepticism that one does receive is more from a fatalism about not being able to get those technologies oneself because of the low material standards of living or generally less advanced state of development, perhaps some political problems, corruption, preventing these technologies from being made available. But at the same time, ordinary people aren't opposed to them. It's only really in the Western world that one encounters serious moral reservations about transhumanism and the pursuit of life extension. Would you agree that that's generally the difference that in the Russian-speaking world, it's more of a kind of practical skepticism, whereas in the Western world, the skepticism tends to be from more of a standpoint of moral objection.
Mm. I was speaking about exactly Belarus, and I think that situation in Belarus and in Russia differs in that aspects. What about Belarus? It was in the list of the most atheistic countries. It was at the 16th place in the world, and we have about 34% of people um, that consider themselves as religious persons. And in Russia, the amount of religious people now is much higher, maybe 70% or more. And the difference between Russia and Belarus in that aspect is that in Russia, uh, church starts to become a part of ideology. They have a law that forbids to say something obedient about religion. It's formulated rather strange because it's difficult to understand. Mm, because it's difficult to understand what offends religious persons and what uh, doesn't offend. Uh, so one person was put into prison in Russia for just typing in his social network page that the Bible is uh, is a list of jokes. He was put in prison for that statement, and I think it's rather frightening situation. And I'm happy we haven't got such laws in Belarus, and it mainly changes the situation. The clericalism isn't a part of governmental ideology, so maybe that's the reason why in Belarus most skepticism is connected with ability to achieve that technologies from financial or from engineering point of view. Uh, in Russia, there are some uh, rather mm, specific speakers that are very hostile to transhumanism. They are often reading lectures about they want to forbid that ideas. They want to opposite something to the development of technologies. Maybe you know uh, as a Russian public speaker and social scientist Alexander Dugin. Sometimes he was invited for uh, some shows, even in America. He has rather interesting idea uh, that traditionalists have already lost, and the progress is inevitable. He is like Nick Land in that aspect, but he thinks that people of traditional beliefs should leave the society and go to some tradition and to create some traditional lifestyle where they will have an ability not to use technologies. I think that idea is rather friendly in Russian landscape of attitude in transhumanism. He doesn't say to forbid transhumanism, to fight transhumanists. He says that he wants to create some specific society where technologies are not developing. I think I like that point of view. We can create the communities, the towns where we will optimize infrastructures to develop technologies as quick as possible. And if people don't enjoy it, if they are frightened, and if they have a strong opinion and they have some interior uh, arguments, some interior statements in their mind, they can not become part of it. So, in that politics of uh, traditionalism competing transhumanism, I think we should make some friendly solutions popular.
Yes, and indeed in the US Transhumanist Party, we've always consistently supported people's right of choice to adopt technologies or not to adopt them. So if somebody wishes to form a community that remains at a certain level of technological advancement and doesn't go beyond it, that's not a problem as far as we perceive it. We support their right to choose that, again, as long as they don't interfere with the ability of other people to pursue those technologies if they see fit. But you're right, this could be a good solution to any tensions if anyone who objects to transhumanist pursuits could just know that, well, they have the option not to participate and to live in their own communities where they would not have to have these technologies applied to them. So hopefully that's how a lot of the critics of transhumanism will react ultimately. But of course, religious prohibitions on criticism are highly troubling to me as well. And I think most people in the Western world would agree that it's highly inappropriate to censor or prohibit criticism of any religion. In our YouTube chat, Daniel Twet writes, blasphemy laws are truly an affront to the universal human right of free expression. And I think it's extremely important. This is a way in which I think in Russia, the political climate has taken a step backward even compared to the era of the Soviet Union. Of course, the Soviet Union was a secular government, officially atheistic, and religion was frowned upon, though legal. I myself am an atheist, and I was raised in a family of atheists, which was fairly common in Belarus. And I remember not ever seeing a reason to believe in God. It just didn't occur to me because I was not raised in that tradition. Now, there were others, and still are, of course, in Belarus, who were raised in that tradition. And I had some discussions and debates with them even as a child, but mostly the conversations were philosophical. It was like they would ask me, well, if God doesn't exist, then how were humans created? And I responded that, well, evolution addresses that. And essentially the debate proceeded from there. But it wasn't any sort of desire for one side to censor the other. And I understood that there were certain cultural, historical roles that the Orthodox Church played in that part of the world. I didn't really have any issue with that, but it seems to have gone far beyond that, in that people who disagree, people who criticize, people who vocally proclaim their non-belief in God are now persecuted, which is highly troubling. Now, it's interesting too, we have a chat from one of our Russian viewers who says, a significant portion of Russians, including me, think that these laws are awful. However, mostly these laws are used for political pressure and not actual hunting of all atheists. So in Russia, do you think these laws are mostly pointed at critics of the political authorities rather than ordinary atheists who don't have a lot of involvement in the political scene?
Mm, can you please explain the question? I still haven't understood.
Yes, so the question is in regard to a comment from one of our viewers who says that mostly these laws are used to put political pressure on people who disagree with the regime in Russia, and not actually hunting all atheists. So they're used selectively. Would you agree with that characterization?
Hmm, I'm not sure. I think that, of course, the church in Russia has its own position, and if now church is a part of Russian ideology, and they often make mm, some ideological connections with churches. They give a lot of ability to influence the media to the priests. Um, I think in the situation when church is given such abilities, of course, it is standing for its interests, and they may have some resentment about the situation that take place in the Soviet Union, the repressions against church. That's why now they are active, and I think they can use the tools that the government gives them. uh, I was speaking about that law about offending the feelings of believers. It's the name of the law. And if now church priests, um, religious activists have such instrument, uh, I don't see the barriers why they mm, why they will not have a desire to use it in any situations when someone make statements against religions. If someone make jokes about that, um, z- that situation about person who get into prison for statement about church, uh, it was that person was unknown. Yeah, he was not a political activist. He wasn't saying anything about government. So I think the church has its own interests and position.
Very interesting. Now, Pavel, would you like to offer your thoughts about this subject, about religious criticism in the Russian-speaking world, and how this situation has come about, that it's now seemingly dangerous even to be a religious skeptic?
Well, I think it's not as dangerous as it could be, and there is folk wisdom in Russian culture that harshness of law in Russia compensated by lacking of requirements to follow this law. So uh, they have a lot of oppressive law against critics of believers. Now they introduce law against critics of the government, and you have to protect feelings of the government officials. And how they apply the law, it's very selective. I think if you randomly post something about church in social media, the probability that you will be prosecuted is probably low. But if you, with your posts and your actions, go in a conflict with the church interest, especially church business interest, like it happened, for example, there was a very famous case in city Yekaterinburg in Ural region of Russia, and church wanna build acquire the land and wanna build a cathedral in the middle of the city, and the people wanna save the park. So there was a lot of clashing between private security, police, and people who live around. And the church was using this law to persecute people who try to protect the park. So I think all this robust legal system of, so to say, oppression is there, but it's applied very selectively when those who is interested in a situation, church or the government, it feels that it's need to protect their interests.
Yes, indeed. Selective enforcement of the laws is quite common in that part of the world. And to some extent, it enables many people to live fairly normal lives still. But if one becomes too inconvenient for a powerful entity, that's when the crackdown happens. Now, it's interesting, though, that not all religious movements in the Russian-speaking world would be hostile to transhumanism. Indeed, there's a long philosophical tradition with Russian cosmism, which was motivated, at least in its early incarnations, by a lot of religious sentiments. Nikolai Fyodorov, for example, was a prominent cosmist author and philosopher. He was also a strong Orthodox Christian. And in our YouTube chat, Ojachoglu Abdul states that some histories of transhumanism indicate Russian cosmism as one of the significant precursors of the philosophy. What happened to the movement of Russian cosmism, Alexander? Do you think it's still influential in the Russian-speaking world today?
Hmm. Uh, I think that up-to-date Russian transhumanism is a follower of that tradition, and I want to say some facts about cosmism and to compare them with the development of transhumanism thought, for example, in America and in Europe. First of all, it is interesting that Julian Huxley first used term transhumanism in 1927, and the philosophy of common idea, as I can translate the philosophic work of Fyodorov, where he was telling his main cosmism postulates, was first published in 1906. So it was published earlier. It's not a competition, of course, but it's an interesting situation that in that work, most ideas of top topics of most transhumanistic ideas were started, and it was full of rather sophisticated futuristic scenarios. For example, he was talking about changing humans' physiology, about uh, changing the mm, the organism to avoid eating plants and animals. He wanted people to take energy from sun directly. So I think the main difference between that start points, the transhumanism and cosmism was uh, in the difference is because cosmism uh, didn't give the explanation about the technologies that will make that scenarios possible, and mm, that ideas about technologies that will help to change physiology to make life longer were developed in transhumanism, in works of such pioneers of transhumanism as Drexler, Attinger, and so on. And what is interesting about cosmism, it had a real influence on life in Soviet Union. It wasn't just a philosophic tradition. Uh, Fedorov had a connection with Tsiolkovsky. Uh, Tsiolkovsky was one who first invented, proposed the idea of rocket, of spaceship with of spaceship which was created by Korolev later, so we can see the tradition of connections. Fedorov was a teacher. He was quite influential on Tsiolkovsky, and Tsiolkovsky was quite influential on Korolev. And we can see roots of space of USSR space program in their ideas, and maybe if Fedorov and his idea didn't exist, uh, USSR didn't have such successful space program. Uh, and also it had an interesting influence of on church of that period. It had an ideas. It had not only some pragmatic engineering, social ideas about building an utopia, making life longer. Mm, it also existed in a connection of that ideas with religious ideas, stating that uh, mm, that that Jesus Christ figure with its ideas shows the way, and the people should create a paradise themselves. So uh, it may be considered as a root of such a transhumanistic direction as paradise engineering. And it's interesting that cosmists wanted to make uh, to make mm, a religion of cosmism, and to make it a traditional Russian religion. The name it were two immortalists, biocosmists, as they called themselves, Svyatogor and Yaroslavsky, who in the period when Bolshevik were fighting churches, they took some churches, they expropriated them, and they said that they are starting their free work church that was a cosmism church in his ideas, and that church existed for some time, but then in Stalin's time, Stalin started collaborations with the traditional church, and that people were repressed. They were killed. It's a pity. It's very sad. I think they had a real ability to tremendously change Russian culture because because as we know, in USSR existed a atheistic program, a governmental atheistic program. It consisted from uh, um, organizing discussions, organizing poetry evening in in a big variety of towns, and also it was an organization called Knowledge. Uh, they they had a governmental program, a plan that was created at a very high level, how to make uh, religious ideas not popular, and there are many interesting overviews um, that there are many interesting overviews about problems of that programs, and one of ideas is that they were too far uh, from from wide variety of people, from workers, and they were not interesting for them and that atheistic programs, and they were not taking attention about some emotional and aesthetics needs of wide variety of simple Soviet workers. That's why they were not popular. And if Cosmism wasn't crushed, wasn't ruined by Stalin at the very beginning, Bolsheviks could use Cosmism as an alternative religion if in the shadow of in the shadow of Soviet society, religion was popular. Not it has not a low amount of followers, no matter it was it mm, it was considered as the enemy of Marx ideology. And if they had an alternative religion, I think it will be a rather good tool, because Cosmism was sophisticated in many aspects. They had a lot of poets, artists, writers in their teams. They made a lot of cultural events, and what speaks from himself, it's a very vicious facts that such basic classic authors of Russian literature as Tolstoy and Dostoevsky were admiring Fedorov, and they said that they fully agree their ideas. And it's interesting because now the traditional Russian church um, o- o- mm, often makes speculations on names of that very famous writers. They say that they were members of traditional church. Uh, I want to tell an interesting fact that in his book Demons, Dostoevsky had um, a situation when one one guy from that novel says that he's going to commit suicide, and he wants to in book of Dostoevsky, and he wants to commit suicide to pay more attention to cosmism ideas. And uh, at the moment when he is making suicide, he says, I'm making it to make ideas of new body creation popular, to make to give ability to more people know about it. And Tolstoy, in his novel Kreutzer Sonata, was also speaking about future as that we can consider as transhumanistic nowadays. That is very similar to transhumanistic projects. He said that having children just for having children, like animals uh, mm, have the next generation of animals, uh, is not ethical. And if the suffering will continue, maybe we have no need to create that new generation, and we should declare the aim of creating uh, a better world with a lower amount of suffering. So that ideas of Russian cosmism were very deep in Russian culture and very influential, and I think they may had influence on uh, creating that transhumanistic organizations that work nowadays. But on the other hand, transhumanists don't call themselves cosmists in Russia because uh, cosmism is associated with religious ideas. It's that ideas are different from traditional church ideas, but in some extent it is still religious ideas, and most transhumanistic groups uh, don't want to speak about themselves as about any religious person. In Russia they have some museums of cosmism, and uh, and they also have some communities, but they're not always in touch with Russian transhumanists. But I think uh, in mm, in some situation when they need to pay more attention for some information, they can unite, and they are ready to make reposts for each other.
Yes, thank you for that overview. And yes, as usual, the reign of Stalin definitely hindered a lot of the possible progress that could have happened. Indeed, one could say in many respects, Russian culture was a lot richer before the time of Stalin, and it wasn't quite the October 1917 revolution that ended that period, because even after the Civil War, however devastating that was, there was a period of more open experimentation in the mid to late 1920s. There was the new economic policy, and then there were a lot of authors, a lot of artists, people from different schools of thought who were still able to operate, at least de facto, until Stalin came to power and really solidified the crackdown and really impoverished Russian Soviet culture at that time. Now, it's interesting also that there is still a cosmist tradition in Russia, though it's distinct from transhumanism as such. It has more religious or historical associations. But I think this leads into the broader question that I wanted to ask you on the subject, and that is, what do you think are some of the cultural and historical reasons why there is a higher representation among Russian-speaking people in transhumanist movements throughout the world? And we discussed the history of cosmism and how that still may be a contributing factor to this, at least in that people don't see these ideas as altogether strange, that there's a precedent for these ideas in the history. But are there any other reasons why you think that a lot of Russian-speaking people, at least relatively speaking, compared to people in other countries, gravitate toward transhumanism?
Yes, I think that I can name one more reason why it's a big amount of Russian transhumanists or Russian-speaking transhumanists in international movement. Maybe they have some special approach, and that approach was to create professional transhumanists. As I know, in many organizations, volunteers are working, and I don't know how it is in Transhumanist Party of United States, but I had a conversation on that topic with some European activists, and I know that people in that longevity supporting or transhumanistic organizations mostly have other work, and transhumanism is their hobby or their activism, and they make it at their free time. And I know that in Russian transhumanism movement, they even had stories when people were selling their property. People from bourgeoisie were selling some flats to have an ability to work in transhumanism and not to work in some firm as an employee at the same time. And also, we know the story of Mikhail Batin, who was a millionaire from business before he started his transhumanistic activities. He had a group of companies, and then he was spending and spending all his money on organizing longevity projects, conferences, and maybe he lost his businesses in that activity. That was a start point of development of their community. So they they lost. They donated that properties, that money from business to make it possible to create that to create that activities. And maybe I agree that the root may lie in that Russian history, the rich history of atheistic project, the cosmism project. I think before I was saying that I think the cosmism project could be more effective than a pure atheistic project. But that Bolsheviks atheistic projects had it was rather wide scale. It was rather impressive in some aspects. They were building a one planetarium in every town, and that planetarium was like an atheistic temple. I was impressed about that fact. So that project wasn't effective at that level that Bolsheviks wanted it to be, but I think it was uh, in in any case effective. That's why uh, atheistic tradition in Russia is strong. No matter than the clericalism now is the governmental ideology.
Mhm. Yes, and those are quite interesting observations. I will say, with regard to the US Transhumanist Party, we are also an all-volunteer organization. So we engage in transhumanist activities when we have time. And for some of us, like myself, it tends to consume most of our free time, but other people are able to contribute essentially as they see fit. Even if some people can contribute 15 minutes a day, that's great. But there are some limitations to that model, of course. And as I've said, I have met Mikhail Batin. It's interesting because part of the conversation I had with him at the time was about various kinds of schisms and divisions within the transhumanist movement. And I mentioned that really it is difficult to get a lot of transhumanists to align on particular projects because people in the movement have so many different ideas about what paths are best to pursue. And sometimes when it's just a matter of having volunteers, you kind of have to respect their time and say, okay, if you're interested in something, please go ahead and work on that, but it doesn't necessarily have to conflict with what other people are working on. That is, it can all be good. And he was arguing more in favor of a kind of centralized strategy that I didn't really see as altogether practical given the present state of the movement. But he said something to the effect that it's possible for all of these differences to quickly disappear if there is a person with money who comes into the movement, and then various other people and their projects will tend to gravitate toward the person with money, the person who can give them that support. And I didn't realize at the time, perhaps he was talking about himself and his own history in having tried to do that with his own funds. But of course, it is a matter of different approaches even here. I see some weaknesses in that model because the money can run out. Whereas if one establishes some sustainable foundation for activities, some sort of baseline that people can maintain even without money, then that's a source of strength, because really people can do that from anywhere as long as they have computer access, and with any amount of resources as long as they have the spare time to do that. But of course, money also can bring some advantages. So the question is, how do you balance the two? How do you make sure that any money you have is an asset and not a liability? So that's, of course, a subject for ongoing discussion. But I also wanted to note in regard to how the Soviet regime influenced atheism. It's interesting because in the Western world, there's this preconception that atheists are somehow adrift, that they don't have a support system, that they don't have essentially that framework of systematic thought that religious people have. And it's a misconception, of course, because atheists are generally very philosophically oriented, and they ask ethical questions sometimes more often than people who just decide to defer and delegate their rational faculty to a religious organization. But at the same time, there isn't the same kind of, let's say, systemic support network for atheists as compared to what existed in the Soviet Union. So you mentioned a planetarium in every city, and that probably helped getting people acquainted with science and technology and mathematics and the importance of those. Whereas in the Western world, it seems that people have to discover that for themselves. So it is an interesting thought how a few generations of a secular society could have prompted more people to consider transhumanist ideas, even though in the rest of that society, living conditions were pretty bad. Now, do you think we could have major transhumanist breakthroughs if only the standard of living of people in post-Soviet countries were to improve significantly enough so that it rose up to the level of middle-class living standards in the West, for example?
It's rather difficult to prognose what Soviet Union would be if the life here was more wealthy. It was a strange situation of contrast when, as the same country, they have a high rank concurrence space project, and at the same times they had a large crowds for toilet paper, and there are some sad and funny at the same time situations when Soviet Soviet sport athletes were visiting competitions at other countries, and when they were going home, they had to open a bag at the custom formalities, and it was full of toilet paper that they were moving it home because they had a lack of such goods. It was a really strange situation, and even now in Russia and in Belarus, if you didn't live at that times, it's difficult to imagine. Mm.
Yes, indeed. So hopefully, if there is material progress in the coming years, that will enable more of the benefits of that scientific secular way of thinking to materialize, and more people to be able to focus on transhumanism and transhumanist projects if they don't have to worry about the basic necessities of life as much.
I think that even at the basic level of wealth, we have a potential to make our transhumanistic movement in Belarus, for example, bigger, because if we will see, uh, Google asks for transhumanism term in our region, they are very low. About it may be about 10 or 20 people are searching for that every month, and I'm afraid all that people may be from our community. So we have a great potential to make that ideas more popular, and we will use different approaches. We will think from we will talk about it from philosophic position. We will talk from longevity position, and we will talk that it's economically very useful for the country to create that new projects. We will use all the abilities to make the community bigger. And I agree if people will become richer, they will concentrate on other needs, but at the same time we have a funny situation when even rich people are not really interested in life extension, and uh, even atheistic rich people, because they say that that rich people say that they have already consumed everything they wanted to consume, and they saw everything they wanted to see. I have an idea, a hypothesis, that mm, middle class is uh, mostly motivated to for life extension, because middle class has a rather big variety of uh, of villains that uh, are not realized still, and they know uh, they they probably will not realize them if the lifespan will be about 70-80 years. That people will have they will they they don't have ability to live in a beautiful castles. They have no ability in virtual reality, not exactly in reality. They don't have an ability to create their uh, own styles in painting, in architecture, and we know that mm, intelligence class is mostly the middle class, and that people have a lot of fantasies, and I think that the middle class can be one of the drivers of transhumanism. Sometimes we are concentrated on scenario, and some people are frightened of that scenario, that some Silicon Valley most rich people are the only driver of transhumanism, and many hostile to transhumanism speakers say that they are building that technologies for themselves. But I think that uh, according to the current level of interest from the middle class, from bourgeoisie, from intelligent class, it is impossible, and all the information is in the most scientific information is in the open source, and even if some uh, mm, last stand uh, discoveries will be made in a closed mod, it will be easy to make them again with other group of scientists open that time. So I think uh, we have a good ability if the progress will be quick to to achieve that technologies for a wide variety of people.
Mhm. Yes, indeed. And I would agree with your characterization that transhumanism is primarily a middle class movement. We don't have a lot of support from multimillionaires and billionaires. The ones that have tried to support the transhumanist movement have likely ended up in a position similar to Mikhail Batin or Dmitry Itskov, for example. We actually have a question about him and his 2045 initiative, which was based in Russia and had as its roadmap developing cybernetic immortality. They were more active during the first half of the last decade. Do you know what the current situation with the 2045 initiative is?
I know that then they haven't got activities in Russian media sphere now. I thought that they are active at international level in English speaking segment of internet.
Well, they have some Facebook groups. My impression is that the height of their activity was somewhere between 2011 and 2014.
Yes, sure, I agree. Now they are even not half so active as that times.
Yes, perhaps someday we will get Dmitry Itskov here as our guest, and we might be able to speak with him about this directly. I don't know if this will happen, but he is an example of a very wealthy person at one point in time who tried to make a personal investment in transhumanism, and some of the activity about 10 to 7 years ago arose from that, but the vast majority of the activity has definitely been grassroots, driven by middle-class people, largely by volunteers. In the United States, you could say there are some tech entrepreneurs who are sympathetic to various transhumanist goals, people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, to some extent, even the founders of Google, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Larry Ellison from Oracle, but none of them call themselves transhumanists. None of them explicitly fund transhumanist organizations or life extension organizations that have existed as part of the movement. If they do anything within that sphere, they start their own organizations and they have their own very particular goals, like Elon Musk's Neuralink. And yet they, I think in many respects, could have done more good if they had invested money into existing organizations. Like if any combination of billionaires gave Aubrey de Grey's SENS Research Foundation $1 billion, I think we would have enough funds to proceed at the maximum pace of theoretically possible research toward longevity escape velocity. Yet for whatever reason, that's still not happening. And Bill Falloon of the Life Extension Foundation often gives presentations about the state of longevity research. And several of the slides of every one of his presentations contain images and some basic information about billionaires who died recently and who, for whatever reason, didn't support life extension, even though they had essentially as much money as they personally could possibly ever need. But on the other hand, it's a bit perplexing to someone like me that someone, even a person who is very wealthy, very fortunate, would feel like they've run out of experiences, because I can think from my present vantage point of hundreds of years of worth of projects and areas I can delve into and develop. And surely if I were more involved in those areas, I could find thousands of years more of opportunities. And at the same time, the world will change, humankind will progress, new books will be written, new works of art will be created, space travel will become a possibility for everyone. And there will never be a point at which one runs out of things to do. Just thinking of some of my own explorations recently, I tried to listen to all of the works of certain classical composers, and I've heard all of Chopin, all of John Field, all of Rachmaninoff, and more recently all of Ludwig van Beethoven, at least the complete works, though there are still some excerpts, there may be some undiscovered compositions still, and even for all the other composers, there may be compositions that have not made it into the official record, but might be discovered later on. But what I learned in the course of that exploration is that this is just a tiny fraction of all of the classical music out there. There were literally hundreds of contemporaries that these composers had that had a similar level of output. And one could spend decades trying to go through all of that output, even in terms of what has been recorded thus far. So it's very difficult for me to imagine running out of things to do. And I hope that maybe with these billionaires, it's a matter of somehow intriguing their imagination as to what some of these possibilities might be. We definitely would benefit from some of their support, but I think this misconception out there that this movement is somehow driven by self-interested billionaires is just so far from reality that it really needs to be pointed out. Now, I wanted to ask you at this point, what do you think are some of the major obstacles to the spread of transhumanism, and how do they differ based on the country or part of the world in which one is focused? So do you think the obstacles are different in Belarus and Russia as compared to the United States and Europe?
It's a very interesting question. I'm facing the need to answer it now when I'm creating international connection for our Belarusian organization. I think that we have some common business that it would be good for us to do, and it isn't properly completed at the moment, and that thing is very important. I think when I settled a goal to make connections with international organizations, I have found out that it's a lot of transhumanism and longevity international organizations, maybe about 10 organizations, and I will be not surprised if more. I can name International Longevity Alliance, HALES, Humanity Plus, and some others. And when someone wants to join international organization, he is not sure what is the coordinating center of international movement. I think that such organizations as Greenpeace, for example, is a good example for us. They are rather well centralized, and if we have a registered powerful international organization with members from most countries, we can influence United Nations agenda. I was reading that there is such option. The international organization can put some issues on their agenda, and also we will have many abilities that is difficult to list. One of them is the attitude in some the attitude in any region to transhumanism will change. People in that region will see that big flag. They will know that transhumanism is something well spread around the world, something well known. Uh, I think that we also should put attention on problem of difference between longevity activism and transhumanism. As I see, there is it's only a difference in it depends only on if the specific group wants to use term transhumanism or or it doesn't want to use it. And I think that it doesn't really matter what will be the name. We we can have consensus about our main interests, and they are often common. It, from my point of view, it would be right to create not political organization with without political agenda. Uh, or only the issues of life extension, first of all, and for example, labor automation, or even without labor automation, because we can have a different political position about this issue, and the absolute consensus between longevity and transhumanistic organizations is life extension, and we can take one international organization, for example, International Longevity Alliance. I like the name. We already have international in the name of that organization. The name is quite suitable for the needs I'm speaking about. And we can develop it. It needs uh, that organization wants to connect transhumanistic organizations too. Of course, they have common interests and that are not frightened about the term transhumanism. The idea is that we can choose any organization of existing as such concentration cooperation center, or we can even create a new. It doesn't really matters, and then make a list of groups that really work at the moment, and to unite them under the umbrella of that organization. And we also need to work mm, on some tools that will help us to widen our communities in different countries. I'm very interested in educational projects. A specific educational program for longevity activists and transhumanists. I think that to educate such people is not the goal of basic governmental or commercial universities in countries, because it will be very difficult to create such new specialization. And when we speak about transhumanism, it's interdisciplinary. We have some history aspects, philosophy aspects that we were talking in that conversation, and we can make that interdisciplinary education a part of work of our international organization, and we can take best experience from regions and make them a part of a major program, and we can transport that recommendations to regions when new organizations are, are just started. We can learn that transhumanism leaders all over the world. I know that it sounds like the mission of Singularity University, but we have some moments about Singularity University. that maybe don't give them an ability to be such international organizations. First of all, they are avoiding term transhumanism, and many people like that term and want to use it because it explains, in one word, it explains many aspects of our program. When I speak with some well-educated person, it's even easier for me to use transhumanism term that longevity term, because I avoid with that tool the necessity to speak particularly about many other aspects. And also Singularity University doesn't want to support some particular technologies, so it's difficult to make it an umbrella organization, because they have their own strategy. I think they and their educational programs can become part of such a common organization if they will want to join. But when the goal is still haven't achieved, we can use other instruments, and they are working not the first day, and maybe it is not the ultimate, not the best solution, and we can offer something else.
Yes, and these are interesting ideas. Now, I will say there's another aspect that would prevent Singularity University from being the kind of umbrella organization that you describe, and that is Singularity University does charge a lot of money for its courses, sometimes over $10,000 per course. And if we want an organization that encompasses all transhumanists, all life extension supporters, or at least as many of them as possible, I believe membership in that organization needs to be free, and people need to be able to collaborate with as few barriers as possible. And of course, any sort of cost of membership or training would be a barrier to a lot of people. This is why the US Transhumanist Party has membership completely free and open to anyone in the world. But we were actually deliberating significantly about creating the kind of umbrella organization that you describe, and we're still in the early stages of doing this, but that organization would be the Transhuman Club, and it would have all of the non-political activities that the US Transhumanist Party engages in, as well as the international outreach, but it would not involve itself in campaigns for elected office, candidates, political lobbying, anything of that sort. That would be still within the realm of the US Transhumanist Party. And initially, the two organizations would be structured very similarly. They'd have the same membership, but somebody else could join and decide to be part of the Transhuman Club, but not the US Transhumanist Party, or perhaps the other way around for whatever reason, though we hope the Transhuman Club would be a broader organization in the sense that it would attract a lot of the explicitly non-political transhumanists, or people who are interested in science and technology but might not be comfortable with the political realm for whatever reason, or people outside the United States who don't have much of an interest in US politics, because US politics is what the US Transhumanist Party focuses on. So that could be a way of achieving what you're describing and bringing in the existing organizations, in the sense that the same people could join the Transhuman Club and then inform other members of the Transhuman Club about the respective activities of their organizations. So yes, thank you for sharing that idea, and hopefully we will have a plan laid out in the coming months about how we would achieve that. And my next question is one that you have somewhat addressed. and that is with regard to what do you see as some areas of possible collaboration between transhumanists from the United States and Europe on one hand, and transhumanists from the former USSR on the other. Do you think there are areas where perhaps those two sets of movements developed in isolation from one another or without a lot of communication, but now, especially with the improvement in communication platforms like Zoom, we could have more frequent contacts and find common projects, common areas of interest?
First of all, I think that common activities in media are really very important, and that is the first point in the list of common activities. And also, I'm very interested in creating a list of most prioritical projects in the field of longevity, and maybe some other infrastructural projects, for example, like that Russian program for working with information code. So we can have a list of projects, and if, for example, you in America have some project that we are interested to invest, we can try to use all tools to find investors, or and make some crowdfunding activities. And also to the other side. And if we will have that database, we will see which projects are already in progress. So some people that are interested in starting projects can use that list and find out that they can become part of that team, and to support them scientifically or financially. Sometimes I feel a great lack of such tool, such list. I'm sure that some projects we want to realize somewhere, even at the later stage, they are closer to be completed. And if we had such information, we could join them, but maybe we still haven't got such tool in our international community.
Yes, I think it would be great to have a tool that shows the progress of transhumanist activity in various dimensions for various projects, research initiatives, advocacy initiatives. It's interesting, lifespan.io has its roadmap with regard to research done on anti-aging. So that is an example of what could be done for the transhumanist movement more broadly. This is the Rejuvenation Roadmap. I've pasted a link to it in the chat. And it just shows, with regard to each of the areas in which aging-related damage would need to be repaired in order for biological senescence to be reversed, how far along the research is. Is it preclinical? Is it in any of the clinical trials? And it looks like there are just a few technologies that are in phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials right now. None of them have yet been released to the public, but it's interesting to have that kind of overarching view. And of course, for any sort of situation like this, it's necessary to update it very frequently. So one needs to have volunteers looking at the state of the research or project activity, check in with the people who are actually involved in those projects and get a status update from them. And if there's anything new, it needs to be incorporated into that kind of database or roadmap very quickly so that people consider it to be a useful resource to keep referring to at any time. Or one could commit to a periodic frequency of updates for the roadmap and say, for instance, it'll be updated once a month. And in the meantime, people who are involved in the maintenance of the system, they would go out and they would seek information and they would form their impression about whether the progress bar on any particular item should be moved this month as compared to the previous month. But it's a very interesting idea. I would encourage people to pursue it. And I think the Rejuvenation Roadmap from lifespan.io is a very good example of how it could be done and how it could be maintained. So another question that I think is related to this is, where in the world do you think the transhumanist vision has the greatest chances of being implemented first, based on a combination of considerations, not just where are these projects most prevalent or more advanced today, but where do you think the most dedicated people are? Where do you think the greatest commitment to making these goals a reality is right now?
Thank you for the question. I will answer it, but I want to say something on the previous question. I like Lifespan website very much. They have a nice tool about sense and about project progress in that interventions. Uh, I very much want to see a tool where we see every region, some leaders from that regions, and very short text about their projects. I think that it all the list with all the countries should be better be short, because in our databases we have we sometimes trying to create some long lists, and it is even for professional professional transhumanists that work in the sphere, it's sometimes difficult to read such lists, and they sometimes they become not up to date because I can try to use a list, for example, from um, 2017, and I'm writing to some groups, and they don't exist exactly. Uh, it will be a great step to progress of our activities in different countries, different regions, if we will achieve the list with the main figures, main projects. For example, we have established some friendly concurrence in such organization. I had thoughts how we can make it diplomatically, not to offend someone. For example, we have two organizations from one country, and in that situation, we have not ability to vote. They couldn't choose which organization to post on that list. And if we have, for example, 10 or 20 organizations, I think that in the United States, it is a lot of longevity projects and transhumanism activists, separate groups, and also a lot of them in United Kingdom. All the organizations that want to be in list vote for one person, and it becomes a diplomat, a representative from that country, and he can help other people who want to get into connection with that country. He can help with the information about different projects, and we will have an attitude to that person like to a specialist who spends some time to list that projects of his country in some database to give most up-to-date information. That's the idea. And now I will try to answer the question about where first we may high chances for success. Of course, it's really very difficult to predict exactly, but I think we have high chances in countries with a more flexible party systems, in which party systems we have often have changes and new parties often occur, and that parties really influence their politics in that country. I think if we will build the powerful international organization that I was speaking about before, we can pay specific attention at such countries and supplement them with materials and instruction with our help uh, to to help some communities to develop and to present their political will at the highest level at their countries. Of course, I think it is no need to create that organizations from the very zero, from not existence. But if that people need help, they need materials, and transhumanism is a new pack of ideas to that region, we can make a great help. And uh, even in Russia, with their rather old transhumanistic movement, they were starting from translating some really classic documents. For us, it was easier to start because the documents were already prepared in the most useful way. And the other aspect that can influence is the it depends how clerical that country in countries where they have clerical laws, and when where church is a part of government, of course it will be difficult to uh, improve that ideas for a higher governmental level by the activists of that countries. So I name two aspects: flexible party system, a flexible parliament, and attitude to religion and tradition in that countries.
Yes, indeed. And I appreciate that analysis. I fully agree that having flexibility in terms of forming political parties and having those political parties have a chance at getting representation is important. And in the United States, we have significant obstacles to this because of the two-party system, the Democrats and the Republicans being so dominant. And this is one of the reasons why I, in my conversations, in my talking points, have always emphasized the need to overcome this two-party system in the US. The US Transhumanist Party advocates a number of reforms to the American voting system that would help achieve that, like ranked preference voting and proportional representation, which exist in many other countries now. So Australia, for instance, has ranked preference voting, and it's more of a parliamentary style of government as opposed to the US model, which is essentially more of a first past the post, winner take all type of system. But in parliamentary democracies, it is possible for a party to get a minority of the votes and still have some representation. So you do have a few seats in the legislative body that are occupied each by parties that focus on particular issues rather than having overarching stances on everything. And actually, one representative of a longevity-oriented party from a European country, I won't say who it is, suggested to us that, well, we just focus on longevity advocacy in politics. And I explained to this person that this would work very well in a parliamentary democracy where it's possible to get into power on a single issue, well, perhaps not into power, but into representation. But then one could get into power by forming a coalition with other political parties that focus on other issues enough to have a governing majority, and then have the single issue political party have some voice in how that coalition governs. But in the United States, that's not possible, because you don't have minority representation. You don't have even easy ballot access for minor political parties. So essentially, in order to be seen as a possible alternative to the Republicans and Democrats, one has to articulate an entire competing, overarching political vision. And this is why we are the Transhumanist Party, and we actually did merge with several other US political organizations in this realm a few years ago, the latest being in January 2020, the US Transhumanist Party merged with the Longevity Party, and we actually had a vote on what name the combined organization would have. And our members overwhelmingly voted for the name Transhumanist Party, I think because it has this general, more overarching focus where we can work on longevity activism and longevity advocacy, but we can also talk about automation, we can talk about artificial intelligence, about nanotechnology, about space colonization, and about voting reform, about universal basic income, those kinds of issues that essentially touch on other aspects of the economy and society. So I think that is a very astute observation on your part. And of course, religious freedom matters a lot. And we haven't had that many issues in countries where there is religious freedom of expression. Yes, we may have some critics here or there, but we generally have been able to have even civil conversations with our critics. We had a Virtual Enlightenment Salon with Dr. Fazal Rana, for instance, who is an evangelical Christian who essentially suggested that transhumanism may become more influential in the coming years, but he doesn't necessarily like the implications of that for religion. So we had a very interesting conversation with him. We found some areas of common ground with him, even where he is not opposed to the progress of science and technology. I think he just worries about how that will influence people's tendencies to hold the same religious beliefs as he does. But he doesn't want to censor anything. He doesn't want to stop transhumanism through the force of law. And I think that's the key difference. In a free country, you can have these kinds of conversations, but if you have an official church that tries to suppress dissenting opinions, that can be a real problem, especially as we've discussed these kinds of suppressions can be selective and politically motivated. Now, before we go to the panel for any other questions, I have a question that mostly arises out of my curiosity, and that is based on your name. Alexander Griboyedov was a famous Russian poet, diplomat, and composer in the early 19th century. He was a bit of a polymath, so he had many different talents, many different interests. Is there any relation between you and him as far as you're aware?
Uh, what about that surname is my nickname surname. It's not real. It's a funny story how I decided to have that nickname. I was in school. I was about 13 years old. Um I I liked his poetry, his literature, work, sorrow because of mind. He is the author of that one literature work, and we all in school had a need to create some nicknames to play computer games online. We were playing that games after our computer studies, and most students, most schoolboys had rather strange nicknames, combinations uh, mm, of numbers, uh, and I decided to make his surname my nickname, and some and little bit later I signed myself with that surname in social network, and that's how it became my nickname in many activities. Uh, n- uh, Really, now I'm at the moment of speaking. If I want to use it further or to use my real surname, but I like it, and mm, and I'm accustomed to it. I'm used to it. Mm, what about Alexander Griboyedov, that famous diplomat? Uh, mm, I don't think I never thought about having really a lot of things in common with him. Is It was just some creative act of a schoolboy. Uh, but I appreciate his literature work. It was one of my favorite classics of Russian literature, especially at school. I can say that his poem is rather funny, and children at school like him most than other famous writers. I was not the only that poem is very dynamic, and also the funny fact about that surname, it translates to English as mushroom eater. uh, t- mm, and of course, when we were schoolboys, we had uh, a lot of jokes about mushrooms, because we knew that it's a drug and it can cause hallucinations, and we thought that it's funny somehow.
Uh, yes, indeed. So it's interesting too. He was a classical liberal, especially by the standards of Russia in his time. So he made fun of the old aristocracy. He made fun of the authoritarian Tsarist regime, and he looked toward Western European culture for influence and inspiration. He was one of the first really serious Russian poets that actually tried to create a similar caliber of literary culture in Russia as compared to what he observed in 18th and early 19th century Europe. He knew multiple languages. He also was a composer. He composed 2 waltzes. I actually used to be able to play one of his piano waltzes when I was a teenager. I couldn't find any other compositions by him besides those 2 waltzes, but if anyone could point me to where they might exist if he did compose them, that would be quite interesting as well. But I'm curious, given that he was ahead of his time and his culture in the early 19th century, do you think he would have been a transhumanist if he were alive today?
It's too rather difficult to как это предсказать,
To
to prognose,
predict,
yes,
yes,
to predict that. You know, in Russian Federation, there are high-rank bureaucrats of the current governmental system that are transhumanists. They're not using the term, but all the agenda they are speaking about is transhumanistic. They have a person with the name German Gref. He is the head of Sberbank, and he's a great fan of Aubrey de Grey. He is very concentrated on artificial intelligence issues and on life extension also. Yes, I think that even a person which is a part of some political system that doesn't have a main point on that issues can be a forefront of such progressive agenda, and maybe their example of German Graph is an example of how Alexander Griboyedov will act if he will be living nowadays and will be a bureaucrat of Russian Federation political system.
yes, indeed. And that was a great answer. Hopefully, we can find out over time more of which Russian officials have sympathies toward transhumanism, because I think that is going to be important to the future of Russia if living standards are to improve. And the advancement of these technologies, the ability of these technologies to reach ordinary people is to be maximized. Of course, there needs to be support within the government. Also, I think these are the people who are most likely to be effective leaders for Russia in the future if they have transhumanist sympathies and they're somehow able to achieve a kind of peaceful transition of power. Putin is not going to be president forever, but who is going to succeed him? That's a question that very few people have the answer to. Perhaps intentionally so. The media in that part of the world doesn't like to discuss what will happen in the future with the transfer of power. But if there are people in high offices with transhumanist sympathies, I think Russia would become very different and a much more prosperous place if they became the eventual successors. So we've had quite an interesting conversation on the questions that we had prepared. Now I'd like to see if anyone on the panel has questions for Alexander. Let's see. How about Art Ramon?
Yes. Are there any like musicians or actors there in Belarus or in that area that would be influential with the younger population that you can sort of work with? The other one I know is like Tommy Cash, but he's Estonian. Maybe working with him to like make a pro-transhumanist video or something to that effect. Any ideas?
It was an interesting situation. Some a group of art created a play about transhumanism, and they created a character, transhumanist character, in their play, according to my interviews, and I also had conversation with them, and they asked me some question. I was. It was a nice surprise for me that they were interested in that topic, and uh, I'm very interested to work in transhumanism, not only with rational tools, with arguments about arguments that state that our improvements will make life better, but I also want to create or to make influence for creation of art or art projects. Maybe I'm not concentrated on famous artists. I think it will be a little bit difficult to get in touch with them. I'm afraid they have a lot of suggestions and a lot of commercial suggestions, not volunteer suggestions, not suggestions to interact for free. But I want to create work groups in different spheres of activity. For example, one group of artists, another group for music creation, the third group for literature. I can say that in Russia they have a rather stable developing literature, fantastics traditions. They have very well known in our circles author Yuri Nikitin with his novel Transhuman. That novel had a great influence. So I have an idea in our community to create such group, and I'm a little bit frightened and upset that in international transhumanist community, in a Russian-speaking community, no matter the situation is the same. We have a little lack of art of our own. Art of our own creation that shows our own ideas, I think. Often, when we need to make a graphic frame for some texts that we are publishing, we are using some arts from the internet, and sometimes it's cyberpunk arts, but cyberpunk is not the future we all want to build. So we use them because we haven't got something better. And of course, we have a great variety of visual content, but it would be better for the community to create our own pictures. It is, first of all, we can put our own ideas that are specific into that art, and it will show the atmosphere of our current work, and it will differ, I think, from the atmosphere from it will differ from the atmosphere of uh, other art projects that are not connected with the movement. And also, on the other hand, it is a good starting business because we have a, mm, a, a situation when some people want to support transhumanism. They say, how I can get money to support it. I need to make some business, and that business may have no any attitude to transhumanism. They may start building, for example, chairs and tables, and that miserable person from that moment is fully concentrated on that tables, and he have no time to uh, be concentrated on his hobby on transhumanism. It may even cause depression, and on the other hand, he becomes more distant from that ideas, and we sometimes will lose some activists in that manner. Uh, in that situation, person becomes too concentrated on his business, on his uh, other life situations, and and he loses the concentration on the issue of life extension, for example. And if we will give an ability for people to make that supplementary businesses. For example, they can produce clothes, they can produce some souvenirs, some artifacts of art on topics of transhumanism. It will be a good start for them, and they will also have time to think about the topics, and they will be uh, more productive in the sphere of popularization. So I like the strategy that art supposes very much.
Now, it's interesting because you see my background changed. This is an excerpt from a painting that I commissioned in 2017 called The City of New Anti-Death. And you can see the entire painting via the link that I posted in the chat. It is actually an ultra high resolution future cityscape, which is specifically not cyberpunk. So it doesn't have any of the dystopian elements, any of the elements of ruin. This is a civilization that has overcome aging and death and a lot of the sources of material scarcity that exists today. And it's a very hopeful, uplifting place to be, with a lot of interesting architecture, a lot to observe, a lot to focus on, many different styles of architecture integrated together, as well as other futuristic styles worked into it. So this was a fairly major commission that I had made now 3.5 years ago. And it is available for people to use under a Creative Commons license. I would encourage more art along these lines. So more techno-optimistic depictions of the future. The American artist Robert McCall, who painted primarily from the 1960s to the early 2000s, he died in 2010, is another example of this kind of techno-optimistic, futuristic vision that is highly transhumanist in my view, and it doesn't have any of the dark dystopian elements of cyberpunk or other more contemporary science fiction art. So now let us go to David Shoemaker. David, do you have any questions for Alexander?
Hello, Alexander. No, I don't have any questions for you, but I do have a couple of comments, and I want to start with thanks for being here. It's
Thank you.
I greatly appreciated hearing about the state of transhumanism in general, and also cryonics earlier as you were talking. I think that conversations of these type, so that we're a half a world away from each other, are extremely valuable, and we strengthen each other's positions by having this working towards a common good. So thank you so much, and I greatly appreciated you being here.
Thank you very much. I was glad to have that conversation. Thank you for inviting.
Yes, indeed. And now let's go to Pavel. Pavel, any questions or remarks for Alexander?
Indeed, that cyberpunk, it's not a future we want to build. It's a game we want to play, but not a future we want to build. Alexander, I really like what your thoughts on creating the, so to say, map of the transhumanist activity in the world. And for the USTP purposes, I was developing prototype to map USTP activities. So if you have some data, we can put in this data visualization. I am looking forward to collaborate, and maybe we can roll out something for the public soon. And the question is, what do you think about strategy for the personal strategy for the ordinary person who, for example, today they read about FAQ about transhumanism, and they discovered, okay, I'm transhumanist. What their personal strategy should be to improve chances to get to the this transhumanist future?
Oh, thank you for that question. And what about collaboration about the map of activities? I will be glad to join. About the question, I think first of all, it will be a good idea for such person to find activists that already work in that sphere in his region. If there is no such activists in his region, he can get in touch with activists that are more close for him according to his language criteria at the beginning. If he is a Russian speaker, maybe at the beginning it will be more useful for him to get in touch with Russian speaking community. If that person knows English well, it would be good for him to write to English speaking transhumanist organization. I know that you have a good international program, and you are glad to have connections, and you give that status of USTP diplomat like Alexei Kadet, for example. If for some reasons that actions are impossible in his situation, but in 99 and 9% of situation they are possible. In that situation, maybe he needs to move to the region where he will have a stable internet connection and make the actions that that I pointed as a first step. Then, when he becomes part of a community, he need to analyze his talents, and I think his talents, his specialization, and he should find out what role he wants to play in that organization, how for him will be more what is the most effective and most convenient way for him particularly to support that organizations. And it's right for such person to find the organizations that particularly he wants to support. For example, maybe he doesn't like projects of organization in his region, and he is concentrated on Science Research Foundation, for example, and he has an ability to support it financially, and he also can get in touch with that organizations. It has consultants, and Lifespan also has consultants, and if that person is going to donate, I think he will be able to get information from that organizations. So I see two ways. First way is donating organizations and making reposts, being part of communities that way, sometimes having a conversation with the people of same ideas, and the other way is to take part in events, make some volunteer help according to his own talents and abilities. As we said before, that person can make content for that organizations. He can write text. He can make a big picture if he has such skills. And the third way is to become a professional transhumanist and to find a way to finance his work as a transhumanist, to start a project, to announce that project to a community in his region or international community. And if community will support that project, he will become a worker of that project, and he can be full-time concentrated on it. That's my answer. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Alexander. And I wanna point out one thing, that USDP has ambassadors in many post-Soviet countries, but Russian Federation still don't have ambassador. So if anyone who resides in Russian Federation right now willing to apply for this position, you're more than welcome.
As for me, I'm not from Russian Federation. Yes, I can be your partner in Belarus, or I can I can suggest some other person from our organization for it. And what about Russian Federation? I think I can suggest someone. I have people that maybe are interested in international communications. I will discuss that topic with them, and we'll give you their contacts.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I think it would be excellent for us to have a foreign ambassador in the Russian Federation, especially given the prominence of that country within the worldwide transhumanist movement, and that would help build more opportunities for collaboration as well. So now we are reaching the 3-hour mark of our conversation. Thank you for being with us here all this time. I would like to ask you to offer some concluding remarks with regard to your impressions of this conversation, any other ideas that you would wish to communicate, anything else that you would like to tell our audience?
It was very interesting for me. I was glad to answer your questions. The atmosphere was nice. I totally liked it. And now I'm waiting for Gennady at my YouTube channel, and there he will give me an interview in Russian language. So it will be soon, and I will be glad to see you again.
Yes, indeed. Well, I look forward to that interview in February and to speaking about the US Transhumanist Party to a Russian-speaking audience. I think that will be part of the process of building these connections that we discussed. So thank you, Alexander, for joining us today. This really is the kind of venue for these interdisciplinary conversations about transhumanism, philosophy, culture, art, science. We seek to do that every week at the Virtual Enlightenment Salon. Next week, on February 7th, we will have an interesting format to our Virtual Enlightenment Salon. It will be a debate on artificial intelligence between two AI researchers, Corey Kowal and Connor Leahy, who will take different sides of an important issue, whether artificial intelligence can develop safely without any restrictions. So please watch our debate next Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And until then, live long